That's the problem with drinking, I thought, as I poured myself another drink. If something bad happens, you drink in an attempt to forget. If something good happens, you drink in order to celebrate. And if nothing happens, you drink to make something happen. That is from the writings of Charles Bukowski. And Bukowski is an interesting figure when you recognize yourself as an author. Bukowski was famous for his writings while heavily inebriated and was, by all accounts, a bit of a disaster of a human being. But I think in Bukowski, we see the honest reflections of an addict. And so part of me is glad that he wrote in that state, but there's also another part of me that's angry that we lost a genius like Bukowski to addiction. I think in a lot of ways, writers romanticize it. The idea of being a drunk writer. There's something in it that we glorify, and I know that I did for a time as well. I remember thinking how interesting of a person I could be typing on a typewriter while drinking whiskey until I passed out. It's a strange thing to admire, but it's true. Today I'm going to be talking about addiction and what it looks like, and maybe offer you some tools if it's something that you're worried about in your life, or even a friend in your life who is currently struggling and you do not know how to help them. I've been on both sides of the coin. I said previously that addiction is pride wrapped in self-destruction, and I didn't really explain what I meant by that. It manifests in a few ways. As an addict, you can be so wrapped up in it that you're actually blind. To me, that is a state where maybe there's almost no turning back. To be blind to the destruction of yourself and to those around you. Sometimes you can be even a little bit aware that maybe something's wrong, or maybe it's not just a social thing. There's this inkling that you have deep down. It's just enough, but you're too proud to admit the truth of it. I've got it under control. It's not a big deal. In fact, I've mentioned this before. When my friend reached out to me, I affirmed to him, yeah, I'm just taking a bit of a break because I don't have a problem. Might be good just to reset a little. Also, there's kind of a self-delusion to the whole thing, thinking that nobody knows. Looking back on my time where I battled alcoholism, there is no way people around me weren't aware. And I think maybe the worst one, and this is really the height of the pride, is when you know you have a problem, but you believe you can handle it on your own. Well, to the message of this entire podcast, you're not alone. And if you're struggling with addiction and you think you've got a handle on it, but you can't seem to break the cycle, know that you're not alone. And maybe it's time to admit it. Because addiction isn't the sort of thing that just goes away. It's rooted in there, deep into your heart, and it's covering something that you're afraid to admit. Pain, anxiety, some kind of fear. Welcome to the Sons of Men podcast, a conversation dedicated to meaning in the lives of men, offering a window into the trials of masculinity where we talk about family, spirituality, creativity, and legacy to better understand each other and to offer solutions for the next generation in an increasingly shallow and hostile world. I'm your host, Curtis Wiebe, a father and husband, addict in lifelong recovery, and an advocate for men struggling in the shadow of suffering. This is episode 8, The Black Pit and the Bottle. I'm reminded of the very call where my friend reached out to me and checked in to see if I was okay. As you remember, I lied and said I was fine. Again, the self-delusion and the pride, too proud to admit the truth. But he asked me a really simple question. Does it take your joy? Does it steal it from you? I think that was probably the question that kicked everything off. Self-assessment, looking around me, looking at where I was in life and how I'd been cycling and circling around this drain for more years than I care to admit, unable to move ahead with anything in life. And when I started to do that, I started to see all the signs of addiction. It wasn't immediate. It took time. I'm going to share those signs with you because I think it's really important to do a self-assessment, because you may be struggling with early signs or maybe it's severe. These are the things I noticed, and I will pose to you in return. I'm going to ask you the first question that my friend asked me all those years ago. Does it take your joy? Just last weekend, we as a family sat around the kitchen table and my wife wanted to teach me and my daughter poker. We were having a poker night at our friend's place and we hadn't played ever. So we were going to learn together, and we were sitting around dealing cards and making joke bets. And I sat in that moment and I realized I had tasted a sliver of that divine joy on earth. And I reflected back before I started recording this episode, when I was writing the notes, what my life used to be like as an addict. There weren't any moments like that. Well, if they were few and far between. And I was probably waiting for my next drink when we got home. But I used to drink in the basement alone and watch movies until I passed out. This was the cycle. This was the reality. And I couldn't experience even the smallest of joys in comparison with what I experienced this last weekend, because I was miles away in my mind and in my heart. And what is joy? It's those moments of the best that this experience on earth can give us. Laughter, joking around with your family, holding the ones you love close to you. That feeling of love shared as a story between all of you in these little snippets of beauty. How many of those do you have? You should have more than some. And you should have more than none, for sure. When I realized that the joy had been taken from me by alcohol, it made me start to see some pretty brutal truths about who I was. This is a tough one for me. Tough to admit, to be honest. I think we all have a darkness inside of us. I think we learn and teach ourselves to be stronger than it, but addiction inverts your heart. What do I mean by that? I would say that my whole life I've been a pretty insightful person, especially when it comes to relationships with friends or people around me. I really relish empathy. I love being able to hear people, listen to people, and offer them advice or encouragement. Is really part of who I am. It's something that brings me a lot of joy. But as alcohol took my joy, it also inverted that heart towards cruelty. That insight that I had for people, that empathy, turned to a vicious weapon. I remember more than a few times, I think of a friend of mine in particular who was really there for me when my daughter was born. He lived right across the street from me. He's a good man. I haven't talked about him yet on this podcast, but he was there through a lot of the hard times up until we moved away from Vancouver. And I would say one of my closer friends. And yet, when I would drink, the things I knew about him and loved about him, the vulnerabilities that he shared with me, I would cut into them to hurt him. The drinking turned me into a insightful monster who exposed the vulnerabilities for wounding. And every heart's different. Every man is different. Are you a calm, compassionate person? But you find that more and more as time goes on, you are angry and unstable? Are you a social person and you love community, but you're finding yourself increasingly alone and isolated? And now you're turning to the drug, whatever it might be, in place of the social life that used to give you, again, joy? And here's a tough one, and one I am not proud to admit. But are you compromising on values that you once held dear? I remember more than once, brothers, finishing a bottle of whiskey on my own late into the night and getting in my car and driving to get a new one. A friend of mine lost his father to a drunk driver. And I swore I would never be that guy. I swore it. And drunk out of my mind, I would get behind the wheel of a car and put people's lives in danger. It makes me sick still today, even thinking about it. That is a sure sign that something's wrong. It can be anything. Do you value kindness and speaking loving to people, and you are now mean-spirited and degrading? Look back 10 years ago to the person you were and say, am I still aligned with that person, or am I compromising on those more and more? The next one is kind of an insidious one. It goes back to what I've been talking about quite frequently, about resentfulness. So do your habits, which we'll call for now, do they make you resent what you should love? When you're drunk or high or whatever, do you quietly wish for a different life? And you look to those people around you, whether it's at your workplace or your family, your wife, your partner, and see them as in the way of what you think is greatness or a better life? Do you even have plans beyond tomorrow or the near future? You're so stuck in resenting everything around you, failing to see that you're at the center of all of it. Are you stuck in a cycle? Can you see that you are? For me, it was the first few weeks of sobriety where I felt like I had pulled my head above water. And as though I'd been swimming with weights around my ankles and they were suddenly released, and I could just tread water enough to look out to the horizon. It's the best way I can describe it. And in that moment, realizing I'd been underwater the whole time and blaming my circumstances. This was done to me. This was taken from me. But at the end of the day, it was me who had placed those weights there. I think the last thing I could say as a sign that you need to be very wary of, which sometimes is more subtle. For me, it became very noticeable. And that was, is my body paying the cost? I had noticeable health issues. This can range depending on what it is you find yourself coming back to as a habit. It could be brain fog or forgetfulness, or for me, I was having extreme stomach issues, something that you would probably find in an old man. And it came on, well, quite suddenly when my alcoholism increased in severity. My body was crying out in desperation. My skin was ashen. My eyes looked like the light had been snuffed out of them. Bags under my eyes. This one's a little bit harder to recognize because it requires a certain level of self-awareness, and it usually is gradual. But again, take a look 5 years into the past and see, how's my mental capacity? Can I remember things like I used to? Age obviously affects those things, but well, drugs and alcohol significantly worsen these kinds of effects. So I'm going to make a statement about my belief concerning addiction. I believe there are only two reasons to take substances: to enrich the joy of the moment in celebration, or to escape the moment in fear. This requires real honesty with yourself about the reasons that you are taking a substance. Remember, an addict is an excellent liar, and primarily to oneself, but to everyone else around you generally. Really ask yourself, what is the reason I am doing this? I am not anti-drinking. I am not anti-drugs. I have very strong feelings about them as a recovered addict, but this is the line. One can have a celebratory drink. One can enjoy a substance. But really, what is the reason? I had a hard day at work. That's a red flag. If you feel you deserve it, I deserve this. I went through this. I deserve this. Be careful, brothers. If you've recently gone through some trouble, some sadness, grief, or despair, and you're using it just to ease the pain a little, be careful. These are the early temptations towards a cycle of addiction. And of course, it's important to note that not all addiction is substance. There are many things that we can do to fuel the addict in us. I see it in social media: anger, rage, people getting caught up in arguments, in the vitriolic, I won't even call them conversations, in the vitriolic discourse that we see so prevalent now. It's anything that you use to avoid responsibility. Video games. I'm also guilty of that one. In fact, when I said it used to be movies, it was also often drinking and playing video games until I blacked out. Mountain Blade 2, Bannerlord, I see your name. Although that one was just completely sober. So just ask yourself the honest question, why? Am I having a glass of wine because I had a promotion at work and I'm so happy to be with my friends? God bless you. But be honest with yourself. That's what I can recommend. That's what I would suggest for you to do if you are worried about yourself or those around you that maybe you've noticed some pattern behavior as well. I think Bukowski summarized it pretty well in that piece that I wrote at the beginning. That's the problem with drinking, I thought, as I poured myself a drink. If something bad happens, you drink in an attempt to forget. Bukowski's talking about numbing. If something good happens when you drink, in order to celebrate, well, that can be a good one. Are you drinking because you have social anxiety? You want to make it easier for you to talk to people? Be careful. And if nothing happens, you drink to make something happen. Boredom. Those are the three key things that we need to watch out for. Or those who use substances to get through the day. Numbing to kill the anxiety or the pain, a quick relief from the daily life. Socializing, like I said, it can be good when done in that way I mentioned above. But again, if it's used to quell anxiety, don't let it be a crutch. It can be a dangerous early sign. If it's a thing that you turn to in reliance to survive, it's only a quick fix to what is actually a long-standing problem and best dealt with. Boredom. Boredom is the one that really caught me early. I think that's where probably some of the earliest cycles of drinking started. Something bad happened to me, and boredom would be moments where I was left alone to my thoughts. My mind would wander. I would start finding myself anxious. It would heighten. I'd go for smoke really quickly. That would be a cycle that would break the boredom. I think this is where social media fits in a lot. We find it difficult to quiet our minds now with so much engagement, so much noise. We never have to think about the stuff that troubles our hearts. It's a real thing. I still struggle with that one myself. I think we all do. So what do you do? What do you do when you notice these behaviors in yourself? I asked some pretty open questions that I think any rational or reasonable person can answer. And if you answer honestly, you're going to come to a resolution, to a realization. If you find that you are indeed struggling with addiction, just admit it to yourself and sit with it. It's okay, brother. It's okay. It's okay to be vulnerable and admit that you've fallen. Sorry, guys. And when you are able to sit with it, enough that you don't reach for a bottle or reach for something to help you escape that desperate fear clawing at the back of your mind, reach out to somebody you trust, because this is something you're not going to be able to battle on your own. I guarantee you, man, there are others around you who know you're already going through this and are waiting for you to come to them for help. And every path looks different, but that moment of honesty could save your life. And that moment of vulnerability to come clean to a friend or a loved one, well, that's called rock bottom, and it can only go up from there if you move forward in humility and love. And what about a friend you see struggling? Someone that you've watched come apart over the years and you're worried? The only thing I can suggest is just be there for them and ask them questions. Maybe you can ask them these questions. An addict doesn't want to hear condemnation or judgment, so don't do it. It'll put up walls. Come to your friend in love and ask him how he's doing. Put your arm around him. Be there for him. Maybe it will just take one conversation for the dam to break and his heart to open. That's what it took for me. One friend reaching out in love and asking me, does it take your joy? Thank you for listening to the Sons of Men podcast. I didn't realize how emotional this one was going to be. These live journals are terrifying. Now, I didn't really know what they would become as I went into it, and this one came up on my radar today. I was struggling all day with the topic to record, and I was just reminded of that beautiful moment with my family and how I would have missed an entire world if instead I chose the black pit at the bottom of the bottle. I hope this reaches one of you and saves you and pulls you back from the brink. I am here for you if you need it. I am a recovered addict, always in recovery. If you need someone to talk to, you can email me. You can find my personal email on my website. I will be here for you, brother. And for anyone struggling out there, you're not alone. You are loved. Until the next episode, God bless.